Thank you very much to Laterna, its leadership, for this opportunity. And thank you everybody for attending. I'll be sharing my screen now so that we can then go on quickly. So thank you. The book we're reviewing, actually 2 books in one, by Pastors John and Diana, and they've been in ministry for over 40 years. And they wrote this book, and it's 2 books in one, both from the perspective of the woman and also the man. Pastor John writes about what every man wants in a woman, and Pastor Diana writes about what every man wants in a woman. It's actually based on research of thousands of people in their ministry over the years. And so they came up with 2 lists. The first is what every man wants. This includes sexual fulfillment, a recreational playmate, a beautiful wife, committed homemaker, admiration, a woman of moral value, a sense of humor, intelligence, one he can totally trust, and one who is absolutely honest. That was rank ordered in terms of presence, the preference from 1 to 10. The other has to do with what every woman wants. And then number 1 for women was godly man, 2 was romance, 3 is sense of humor, 4 is communication, 5 is honesty, 6 he has to be a provider, 7 is a family man, 8 is respect, and 9 leadership, and 10 is faithfulness. So very, very quickly we can see that in terms of expectation, from that research, it differs, the genders differ in terms of what they were expecting. And so this book is therefore split into 2, taking into consideration they used this in their research. When we look at Pastor John's part of the book, what every man wants in a woman, it shows what is possible if one is willing to make one's marriage better. In there also, in that section, Pastor Diana comments on she says. So there are parts scattered all through that, her comments on she says. And then a special section is there for women, titled Hints for Her. So as you read, there are hints for women. Even this is written from a man's perspective. It showcases differences in how men and women think. And at the prayer of every chapter, there is a prayer there that's titled Asking God's Help. Let's look at the chapters. So I'll do a quick run through all the chapters and just do a quick summary of each. Number 1 says, has your marriage lost its sizzle? And here, Pastor John is talking about the fact that problems in marriages are caused by high expectation, no preparation. The failure to recognize differences between the sexes, which we already have seen some of it there. And then the issue of sex, very, very critical. He describes in detail some of the issues that has to do with that. Chapter 2 looks at what women want. And he says what women want is love me completely, love me passionately and romantically. And that attraction is not necessarily all sexual. He says that women want that, that I'm divinely different and I won't change. And that communication needs to be open so that they want emotional intimacy and they also want spiritual intimacy, and that submission should be mutual. In chapter 3, he writes about love secrets that men must know. He says that, what you walk away from is what God gives you. So you must learn sacrificially from some things in terms of gaining the love of your partner. That love is not a license to change and control your partner, and that don't ever believe that you totally understand your wife. Stop the blame game. And if you do make mistakes, acknowledge and apologize He recommends that you learn to love and that you understand that sexual fulfillment is not enough to sustain marriage. And that if you're the jealous type, jealousy will drive your wife away. And that in all things, men must also learn to forgive themselves. If you made a mistake, you've apologized for it, move on. Chapter 4 talks about more love secrets that a man must know. And here he says, no pain, no gain. If you want to succeed, then you need to put in a lot into it. And that your parents' marriage should not control yours. So you should not base yours on the pattern of your parents. And that you should put love first so that you can make your love to last. So put the love with your spouse first. And that what you believe to be will become so. So a lot has to do with our beliefs, and that our attitude is contagious. So we need to watch our attitude, and that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Your happiness is a choice, and we need to learn to feel great about ourselves, and that love you don't give, you will lose. If you don't give your wife a lot of love, then there's a tendency that there's a danger that is there. In chapter 5, he addresses some of the common issues and problems with marriage. He says, well, is it possible for a marriage to survive adultery, abuse, and imprisonment? And he has many, many examples of people they had worked with in their ministry through prayer, through counsel, and through the fact that people were ready to change. And there are 4 questions there that I find quite useful. He says, these 4 questions we need to ask ourselves constantly. What about your marriage? What do you dislike about your marriage? What changes would you want your spouse to make? But that is not all about your spouse. What changes are you willing to make? And your survival of the marriage will depend on this. In chapter 6, he repeats, but now he's talking about addiction, homosexuality. And again, he says that he has several examples there of people whose lives were transformed. In chapter 7, he talks about whether the marriage can also survive the lack of passion or poor management. There are many, many examples also there. And clearly what he was hoping to do there was just to show that these things can actually be looked into, they can be addressed if we will obey God, if we will listen to one another. Communication was is part of the things that they emphasized, both of them. If we will do that, it will help tremendously. What we then have in chapter 7 was he has 7 steps to marriage survival, and I recommend that we look at this also when we're reading through the book. He says, well, number 1, totally forget the past. That your husband is king, speaking to women now, priest and prophet. And number 3, he says, submission means mutual submission. So God has said the woman should submit to the man, but you need to submit also. So submission will be mutual submission. He says that men should, as much as possible, eliminate father absenteeism. So men needs to be present in their families, men need to be present concerning their children, and that we need to look at that very, very carefully. He says, well, you should start communicating today, you should live in sexual freedom, and you should revere relationship. He ends by looking at love's portrait in chapter 8, and that love is not what you feel, but what you do. We must love like Christ. And without love, we're spiritually dead. And he looks at the classical biblical approach. He says love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it doesn't boast, is not rude, love is not self-seeking, love is not easily angered, and that love is loyal. And so basically that's his part of the book. And in concluding, I like the part of the poem. It says, well, a ball is not a ball till you indeed, a bell is not a bell, till you ring it. A song is not a song till you sing it. Love in your heart is not put there to stay. Love is not love till you give it away. So that means that for love to be indeed useful, to be productive, to be fruitful, you need to give it away. You need to love the other person. The other side of the book, which is Pastor Hagee Mrs. Part of the book, which is what every man wants in a man. Now, she takes a different approach to Pastor John in that she discusses each of the 10 points in reverse order. So what was number 10, she took first, and then we go to the first one. Again, like in the other part of the book, John's comment, Pastor John's comment is there in he says, just to give a male perspective to some of the things that she's saying. And then the special section for men titled Hints for Him. Here again, she also has a column from a trade counselor, a PhD, Dr. Ann, who also gives some insight into some of that from a trade counselor point of view, marriage counselor. And at the end of every chapter, there's a prayer, 2 types of prayer, the prayer of repentance and the prayer of new beginnings. So starting with her, number 10 was faithfulness. That she says, well, what faithfulness means to women is that my man must be completely loyal to me in thought and deed. And loyalty means you're loyally committed for life, and that your needs should be communicated. Nobody can know your mind. Communicate your needs. Communicate your needs. Number 9 is leadership. She says, well, she expects, the woman expects that men will lead with kindness and understanding. And well, the key for her is that, well, it's good to say men should lead with kindness and understanding, but how do we help men to do that? How do women help men to do that? And that submission is possible, and it can be done under God's empowerment, but that is not very, very easy for anybody to submit, including women. But that trust is also important, and that your ultimate security that you want is rewarded as a woman only when you are supportive of your husband. In discussing 8, respect, she says, well, respect has to do with feeling or showing honor for both the position and the person. For the position, yes, God has given that to the man, but for the person, you need to earn the respect. Respect for the person needs to be earned. And that if you want to get respect, you need to give respect. And that women also need to be grateful for their husband, for the things God is doing through them. And that women must also believe and act in the way that shows that their husband has great value. Number 7, which is family man. They want the man to be a family man. It says, well, if you want to do that, honor him. And that men should, women should look at quality time, but that they should establish important parent rules. She speaks of the fact, one of the things she said there was how one of their daughters, having gotten a no from her, then went to her father, who then said yes. But when they came together, established family, have you spoken to your mom before you spoke to me? I said, well, since she told you no, that's what it's going to be. He says, well, but for that, we must establish the right environment. If we look at 6, looking at the provider, he says, well, it starts from even before you marry, because you will marry when you date. Things that happen while you are dating will determine what happens in the marriage. That couples should manage their spending by having a budget, and they should stay within their spending plan, and they should set goals for the future, and they should both be good stewards of all earnings. Part of what she does is take from the point of view of the woman providing, being the essential provider, and that you need to really, really appreciate the man, while the man must also appreciate the woman. Number 5, which is honesty. He says, well, honesty is the refusal to lie, to cheat, or deceive in any way. But she says honesty is a two-way street, and recommends that people should be honest with their spouse about their past, their present, and their future. Not an easy one there, but that's the recommendation. And that we should create a climate of complete honesty, but that people should be honest but compassionate. We should not destroy others by saying that, we talk honestly about everything. In number 4, she looks at communication. and says, well, it has to do with listening, but not just listening, but paying attention. And that in communication, men and women communicate differently. And she speaks extensively there about the differences between her and her husband. And that, well, one of the things that she learned the hard way is that you can't change others. What God has put in them for His purpose. She shares, like I said earlier, where she was praying for many years about her husband, that the Lord should change him. And one day, the Lord just answered her and said, well, I will change him now as you have wanted, but I can never use him again. And then she had to repent before the Lord. Number 3 says that there's a need for a great sense of humor. And humor is not laughing at other people's expense, and that you can use laughter to diffuse anger and also to diffuse tension. Number 2 is the romance, and this she spent quite some time showing here that women actually like to be romanced and what romance actually means. But she has advice for women: 7 ways to romance your husband. Tell him you love him, praise him, prepare a special meal for him. Well, praise God for that. They will give him gifts, surprise him, that men like plenty of touch, and also that you be loyal. Number 1, which is the last one there, is that women want a godly man. But she says, well, if you look through the Bible, the godly men in the Bible, starting from whether it's Adam to Noah to Abraham to David, they were flawed individuals chosen by a flawless God to do His will. So you must understand that your godly man is not necessarily flawless. And so the key question is, what is a godly man, and how can I as a woman help my husband to become one? And she answers that question. A godly man is one who has the mind of his father and has learned to say no to the world. Chapter 11, which was the last chapter there, is the Torah way, and that's the conclusion. And in essence, what the whole of that chapter was saying is that we should do marriage the Torah or biblical way. And I like the advice there also from Dr. Ann. All the 10 wants that people say, whether men or women, is contingent on allowing God to take over. What you think you want may not be the best, so we need to allow God to actually take over. In conclusion, the 2 books in one emphasize godly behavior, preparation before marriage, obedience, the power of prayer, and wisdom. And this book is useful for whether you're married or you are preparing for marriage. A lot of wisdom there about those who are yet to marry, what they can do, and even for the married. They, like we said in concluding, they said, while both men and women think they know what they want, they should actually allow God to develop them and their partners the qualities that will help them to fulfill His will. Both parts of the book emphasize prayer, repentance, patience, understanding between the husband and wife, and acknowledging the difference between the husband and wife. And that we must believe that no difficulty is beyond God's transformational power. In essence, that's what the 2 books in one are all about. I find them very, very useful. They recommend prayer, they recommend counseling when there are issues, and they recommend that people communicate. And I want to thank you very much for listening. These are the key essences of the book. I do pray that you will go, if you haven't read it, you go buy it and read it yourself. And if you have, read it again. It was very, very, very profitable for me as I read this book again in preparation for this. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Laterna and Pastors Remy and Nika. Thank you.
Mr. Falayo, thank you so much. That was beautiful. That was excellent. Thank you. I'm sure I enjoyed it, and I'm guessing everybody else did too. Thank you very much for that. I will ask you 1 or 2 questions and then open the floor for guests who might have questions for you too. But before then, let me say to those who have not seen this book before, when it kept saying 2 in 1, it is really 2 in 1. If you can see my screen, the 2 books you just described now are in this singular book. So the first thing I love about the book is the way, the book is. So in front here is what every man wants in a woman. Then when you flip the book over, that's the second book. And then you have to turn it to get the title, what every woman wants in a man. So he wasn't joking when he said 2 in 1. It's actually 2 in 1. Both books are here, as you can see. So when you read half of it, you are reading one. Then when you turn it over and read the other half, that's the other book. So that's the first thing I love about the book. So it's very fascinating. Never seen a book, like this. And I've seen a few books in my lifetime. So it's excellent the way, the book was made. And immediately you see it, you really want to read it. That's the first thing. And secondly, I like one powerful message about the book is its acknowledgement of the fundamental differences between the two sexes, between men and women. I absolutely like that. And the fact that each of Diana and John taught based on the peculiarities of the two sexes. I absolutely love that. And I think that a lot of marriages fail or succeed based on a grasp of those fundamental differences. Mr. Folayo, that's the first thing I'm going to ask you, that I'm sure this struck you too when you were reading the book. What did you make of that? And what stands out the most for you in the book? I know that it's such a rich book, so many things to take away, but what struck you the most when you read the book?
Well, what struck me the most is the fact that indeed the differences in terms of both the makeup of men and women, there are differences in the makeup, there are differences therefore also in their expectations, and that it's possible to believe that you actually know somebody without really knowing them, and that for each gender, where in general terms, where men are more they take a logical approach to things, women take more of an emotional approach, and that it's designed of God like that, so that you will have the different attractive, okay, and both will become one. Those two individuals becoming one, but still retaining their individual differences. And if you don't acknowledge those differences, then it's going to be very difficult. And you acknowledge that both in terms of expectation, in terms of communication, isn't it? And also just learning throughout. So it means you keep learning. Don't ever believe you know your partner fully, but keep learning about them and take whatever changes that are required.
How much do you think we are ignorant or knowledgeable about these things? I'm getting real now, in practicality, in the society that we live in, how ignorant are we of these things taught in this book, in these two books?
In very many ways, we are. And I'll tell you something, that even when you try as much as possible with all knowledge, you never fully know your partner. I mean, I've been married for 30 years, and I must tell you that sometimes I look at my wife, and I'm sure she looks at me and she's like, really? Where is that coming from? So we can be really, really, really very ignorant. A book that can go with this hand in hand is the book by Chapman that speaks about the love languages. Do you understand? And there's an approach to everything in terms of touch, in terms of talk, in terms of gifts that is different. Not just on a gender basis, but also on unique basis. So you can speak generally about women, but not every woman is also alike. Not every man is also alike. And so that was very critical for me. We don't often acknowledge it, and there are very many instruments that can help us to understand each other better if we really, really want to.
Looking at the two lists,
Yeah.
the lists, what men want, the summarized list, I mean, the two lists.
Yes.
Did you notice distinct differences? Did you notice differences and similarities? What I mean by that is, what did you notice in both lists? Then what did you notice that stood out in the different lists?
Okay.
Is my question clear?
It's very, very clear. It's very, very clear. The place of sex, for example, for both genders can be a noticeable difference. And that both in terms of the approach, both in terms of, even when you're talking about sexual fulfillment, the woman differs from the man. And you can see that in the list. While high on the list for men who are sexual fulfillment, what women were looking for was a godly man. But for both, it's clear that for both, romance actually plays quite a lot, even though the approach may differ. If you look at the two lists, the second one for man was a recreational playmate. The second one for women was romance. Well, recreational playmate, they mean romance, depending on the approach that you look at that. But men want somebody, that they can be men. They can be like babies. But the approach to romance can actually also differ depending on who we are actually talking to. Now, for both of them, honesty and commitment, we can see is common. So honesty and commitment stands out very, very well, and also the need for trust. Those are things that stands out in both lists. But in terms of priority now, women actually want a godly man and romance first, but men, for them, it's sexual fulfillment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Folayo. Lest I monopolize this, let me open it to everybody else. If you have a question, please kindly indicate by raising up your hand. I can see two hands already up, but please ensure that all mics are muted. Only those who have the floor should unmute, please. So it will help our audio, help us hear what is being said very well. So let's get on with the hands that are raised up. Laterna team, can you help us out? Let's see, which hands are up? Okay, let's see, which hands are up? Let me see. I'm trying to check which hands. It's quite a number of people.
I can see Sister Omotayo.
Okay, Sister Omotayo is there.
Maybe. Yeah, that's one person I can see.
Okay, let's start with Omotayo then. Please unmute and go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Pastor Benga. My question borns out of the fact that when you were reviewing this book, I was remembering a practical example of a friend of mine that came discussing with us the issue of addiction, homosexuality in relation to her marriage, and the advice we gave her. But I wouldn't talk about the advice. The question is, what would you advise in a situation where a wife that had been married to her husband for about 25 years had always managed and endured, that's the word, always endured the fact that she knew the husband was suffering from addiction, irresponsible kind of behavior, homosexuality, and which he kept on denying to the extent that it was affecting the children. So she came running to Pastor Motosha and myself, my husband and myself, and she needed advice. And this guy and the woman are believers, they go to church. She had spoken to her pastor about it. Pastor had talked to the guy stopped going to church. At the end of the day, the lady came down here to her place, broke down in tears. And when I was going through with Pastor Afolayan on chapter 6, which had to do with, can a marriage survive on addiction, homosexuality, etc. Her story came to my mind so fresh. And so Pastor was able to pastor her, advise her what to do. We prayed along with her. Eventually, she came back 2 months later to tell us she had made up her mind to relocate overseas. And she was taking her 2 children. She said, thank God she didn't have more than 2. So I said, how do you want to do it? She said, well, she's applied to the embassy. They denied her. By God's grace, when we prayed, I told my husband, she'd sought my assistance for the visa. But I told my husband I wouldn't do that until I get the buy-in of her husband. So Pastor and I went to see the husband. The husband said no, and so we refused. But later on, she came back. Long and short of it, I was moved because I'm a woman, I'm a wife, and it was affecting the children. So we knew the best was for her to relocate when every other effort to get this practical demonstration of chapter 6 to get it to favor her, which means for the man to change, for God to work on his behalf and all that. Long and short of it, she traveled with her 2 children. The man bore malice with Pastor and myself for 10 good years. But by God's grace, the 2 children now are graduates. One is a lawyer and one is an engineer. When he got to know that, because I tried to say, we just keep in touch with your husband. The man came back to us to apologize because we assisted the wife to get the visa, apologize, and by God's grace, they have reunited. But the question is, should she have endured and endured and endured? What would Pastor Gbenga would have advised her to do otherwise? Which meant, aside of the advice we gave to her, and thank God it turned out well, what other thing would Pastor Gbenga have advised? Thank you.
All right. Are you asking Pastor Gbenga now or from the book?
I'm asking you because it's a chapter. It's a chapter in the book.
I have to review the book. But I think I share some of the things that the book says. And that's the fact that you can't change somebody who doesn't want to change. That's number one. And for every case that they discussed, one of the key things that they emphasize is that both parties are committed to make negative changes and to commit to them. Both in prayer, both in counsel, both in specific actions. Where either of the party is not interested in taking specific actions, then it becomes difficult to continue to subject the other person. I believe that at that time, it is the individual who will be able to say, this is how much I can bear. And if you can't bear it and your partner will not object to the process of change, I think there must be an opportunity like this couple had for some separation for some time, which I think is what happened here. Separation for some time so that each person can understand the changes that are required, take those steps, and then the Lord can bring them back. Now, all of this must be done in an atmosphere of prayer, in an atmosphere of faith. Both the woman who went somewhere, who is still interested and committed to the marriage, I'm sure must have been praying, trusting God, isn't it? And all of those things that you said are still in touch with the husband in one way or the other. Sure, this is not a hatred of you. This is just that I don't agree with certain aspects of your behavior, and so I would like a change in this. God helping both of us. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are really running out of time, and I can see so many hands up. Let's try and rush 2 questions. I can see here Fumi Wale Adegbite. Can you please ask a question? Your question, make it very brief. We're actually running out of time.
Yes, the question I have is very direct. When Pastor Falayan was talking about expectations, he mentioned something about being completely honest about your past, your present, and your future. And even he had to sort of pause on that point. So I just wanted him to sort of highlight on that. Is it really completely necessary for you to be open about some things maybe, you've kind of repented of in your past?
Great. Before Mr. Folayo goes on, please, Olohi Efekemo, I'm sure I didn't pronounce that correctly. Please forgive me. Olohi, can you please ask your own question? Please unmute and ask so that he can take the questions at the same time.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'll just type in on the chat box that we could type out questions on the chat box so that the moderator can take them all together, especially if it's similar questions. Okay, I just wanted to ask Pastor Benga on the issue of submission. I'm happy that the female author was able to mention something on submission and that it is mutual and on both sides. I just wanted you to throw more light on that because over here, especially in the African culture, it is believed that it is the woman that should submit. However, the Bible is clear that submission should be both ways. So I wanted to just get Pastor Gwenga's perspective on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Mrs. Adetayo is also raising up her hand. Mrs. Adetayo, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can I ask my question quickly?
Yes, please. So Pastor Gwenga can take the 3 questions at the same time once you are done.
Okay. So the question is this. Pastor Benga alluded, to love languages because they do change over time. Your love language when you just got married actually might change or might be rearranged in the 35th year of your marriage. I'm currently in the 35th year of my marriage. So my question regarding the book, which has been clearly elucidated by Pastor Benga, is the priority ratings. Do they vary with the age of the couple, with the age of the marriage? Maybe when you are young, this whole issue around sex and all of that is highly rated. But then as you find yourself in the 50s and the 60s, do those, you listed them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Do those orders remain over time, or one becomes perhaps more important than the other? Does it vary by individual or by age? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I go on?
Yes, sir. Please go on.
Okay, thank you very much. Sister Fumi asked a question on the past, present, and the future. And the truth is that it's a very difficult subject. I would say, number one, you need to know yourself and know your spouse. Pray about it. Some spouses are not able to deal with some information. And so you need to understand your spouse and pray. But you see, the power that something that you don't confess or talk about has over you is that at times it can hold you in subjection and in bondage and in fear. That if this person will get to learn about it. I mean, she had there a story of a lady who had a baby, who had an abortion before she was married and never told her husband. And then she was held, in some form of bondage and fear until she came to her and then spoke to her, and she advised that prayerfully she should go and confess to her. And she did, and the Lord took over. So there's a place of the Holy Spirit, there's a place of counsel, there's a place of prayer, there's a place of knowing your spouse. Every advice cannot be taken wholeheartedly in every situation. I have seen a case where somebody who was involved in adultery actually went and confessed to her husband, and the Lord had gone ahead of her and touched his heart. So things can happen in different ways. If we don't talk about them, there is a likelihood that when the person discovers, then it becomes a problem. Then for Sister Olohi, you said, well, submission, like I said, also is not the easiest. And you can't submit no one can submit, whether a man or a woman, without God's help. That's the truth. The nature of man in itself is not a nature of submission, whether it's a man or a woman. So we need God's help. We need to study these scriptures. They have, and this is one thing I recommend. Please also go through this book. In there, she's written quite a lot about how we struggle with submission and what the Lord did to actually help her. And so it's possible. And we need to talk about that a lot more in this part of the world, that submission is mutual. However, the Lord, from the biblical point of view, God has put somebody in the place in terms of the authority in the home. I hope I'm communicating. And from a biblical point of view, we must acknowledge that. But we must also always look at the flip side. It says, you should lead compassion. If you are saying authority, you exercise authority with compassion. Submission doesn't mean slavery. Submission doesn't mean subjection. Submission means, lovingly submitting your will to another, because that person is also loves you the way that Christ loves the church. In fact, that's always the comparison. When we're talking about that, before Christ demanded submission from the church, Christ gave while we were yet sinners. And so that's why, please, men here also need to think of that. Mrs. Adetayo, does priority rating change? Even in the book, I think Pastor Diana speaks about that. She has a whole list there from when people were in their 30s to when they were in their 70s and 80s. And these priorities do change. The truth is, some of the things over time, you accept that some things will not change in your spouse. You accept by understanding and by experiences, and your priorities can actually change over time. These lists are general, and they can also be, they can change from an individual point of view. As we grow older, as we know ourselves better, as we know our spouses better, then of course, and then the circumstances of life also will help us in terms of these priorities. But the fact is, we must always learn, relearn, unlearn, and then move ahead as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Folayan. Thank you. Fantastic. And thank you to everybody, particularly those who have raised questions, and everybody else listening. I've learned a lot. It's been a fantastic time for me personally, and I'm sure for a whole lot of us too.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of our CEO, Pastor Remy Morgan, and Executive Director, Pastor Mrs. Yinka Morgan, I'd like to express our appreciation to our guest and reviewer for today, Pastor Gbenga Folayan. Thank you very much, sir, for honoring our invitation to be part of the second book reading session today. Thank you also for the very concise and informative review. And to our anchor person and co-host, moderator, Mr. Kunle Kasumu, we're grateful. Thank you for being a part of this initiative and project, even as we look forward to having you in subsequent sessions. And to our esteemed participants, we really value your time. So thank you for your participation today, especially during the question and answer session. We look forward to your feedback and comments, please, even as we work to make this better and better over the coming weeks. The book for next week, Thursday next week, is Eat This and Live by Don Colbert. And we'll be having as our guest Dr. Abby Abraham, consultant primary care physician and medical director of Flax Medical. So it promises to be a very interesting and insightful session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. I'd like to hand over now to Mr. Kunle Kasumu as we wrap up on today's session. Details of the book for next week, as I mentioned earlier, will be communicated to you on our various platforms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawson. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to have moderated this. and a pleasure to be part of this. Thank you once again to Mr. Folayan for such a wonderful, excellent review, and to everybody for being so patient and being part of this very lovely initiative. So hopefully we'll see you again next time we have this book club session with Laterna. I'm looking forward to it personally, and the book that we're reviewing next looks very exciting. Thank you once again. Have a lovely afternoon and have a lovely rest of the week. God bless you, and see you next time.